Week 4 has officially wrapped up, and like every other week, it has its fair share of blowouts, close games, upsets, and over-milking the absolute piss out of that stupid-ass Aflac commercial that makes the room's acting look legit. Nonetheless, it's time to go over all the important things that happened, and a little more from Friday. It's an ACC battle between two teams from two different coasts. A long-awaited battle with two of the most goofiest-looking mascots of all time. But which team is goofier? I believe that trades between the two squads. Ashton Daniels and Kyle McCord are two quarterbacks who have been in chaos mode the past few weeks. They certainly caused quite a bit of chaos in this game. You could even say college football chaos. The main difference was in the style of play. While Syracuse had twice the passing yards that Stanford had, they also said that running the ball was overrated and they had only 26 yards total rushing. Both quarterbacks shared 2 interceptions and had their fair share of great plays as well. Elike Manor put the Stanford offense on easy mode as he torched the Syracuse secondary. Like I said earlier though, Syracuse's refusal to run the football is a play style that will not work in the long run. And while they had an incredible comeback effort at the end of the game, the football gods had made their decision long before it.
Kenny, right down the middle, don't you know? Stanford.
Now feels like a good time to let everyone know that Stanford has a 100% win rate in ACC play. Expect to hear that stat for a while. It's their greatest accomplishment since Christian McCaffrey. Wait a second, both these teams are ranked? Well, one of them won't be ranked for long anyway. We knew that this was going to be one of the better matchups of the week since this was two pretty good ranked teams going against each other, and this would be by far the toughest defense that Dylan Raiola has gone up against. The Fighting Illini is no slouch on offense either, so this was going to be a down-to-the-wire matchup. Nebraska knew it too, as they moved all the Friday classes online and once again kept their sellout streak alive. But Nebraska fans' torment is far from over. Since the veteran quarterback for Illinois, Mr. Luke Ottmeyer, is far more used to these types of battles, he had the quarterback edge over Raiola. He had 4 passing touchdowns with no interceptions, compared to the freshman who, while having more total yards, had an interception at a high point in the game. Like Syracuse, they struggled to establish a decent run game, which made it all the more difficult for Raiola to make big plays. This eventually led us to overtime where Illinois, who once again is used to situations like this, delivered. Nebraska, well...
Blitz right up the Raiola's down, Illinois pulls it off. A huge upset.
I don't think there's been a fan base more tortured than Nebraska in the past 7 years. They have the longest streak without making it to a bowl game, and this is now their 25th straight loss to a ranked team. It's not like they played bad, Illinois just came more prepared, and that's all there was to it. Speaking of the Fighting Illini, good old Burt Bielema has the team 4-0 for the first time since 2011. Are we witnessing a Cinderella in the making? We'll find out in due time as they go to the slightly annoyed Valley to take on Penn State. One thing is for sure though, Illinois playoff team, sure.
Oh, sweet sleeping donkey.
Wake up!
For a game that was on the CW, it carried none of the usual mannerisms that it always has. This has the credentials for being the game of the season. Almost 1,000 yards of total offense, to teams trading blows left and right to the point you thought both teams are going to lose, and a fair share of surprises and moments you could only see at the FCS level. Wazoo was down and out for the game until the second half rolled around, and then suddenly they remembered that they used to be a Power 5 team. On top of all that, the same kicker who missed the tying extra point late in the fourth quarter comes in at the end and nails a 52-yarder to send the game to overtime. It was pure madness. It's the living embodiment of proof that the Pac-12 never died. It just reincarnated to Mountain West after dark. The fun wasn't over though, as in overtime, they traded blows until finally, sometime long after everyone on the East Coast fell asleep, someone called game.
For San Jose State to extend the game. Emmett Brown under duress. There goes the ball, and the Cougs are on it! To improve to 4-0!
Before you ask, that's not a lie. Washington State is undefeated, so those rumors about the Washington game being their Super Bowl was a complete lie. Please let something like this happen in the playoffs. If they can continue to make games like this happen every week, I may just start cheering for Wazoo to make the 12 seed. Now I wonder if the AP will have the balls to rank them. NC State is dead. I'm not sure who's responsible for killing them between Tennessee's defensive line or Clemson's, but someone has to be held accountable for this. Dave Dorian's squad just got completely splattered. This wasn't a night game either. It was at noon. Noon! This is the result of what happens when one team makes improvements post a loss and the other one sits on their own hand and sharts to eternity. Cade Klubnik had almost 300 total yards, including 70 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. The final score doesn't tell the full story either, as Clemson had their third stringers out by the third quarter. I know that Grayson McCall was out for this game due to an injury, but this is just an outright destruction. The only hopes left for NC State is that CJ Bailey winds up being the missing piece that the offense needs to wake up. Otherwise, I'm placing you on upset alert for the match against Northern Illinois. Clemson, on the other hand, is now back in the race for the playoffs. With only one loss to a top 3 team, they can easily win out the rest of the way since they live in the tank conference. Speaking of tanking, should I do this? You know what, people are already making the comparison to Tree, so I might as well go all out. Welcome to the first edition of the College Tank Bowl, between two teams who are battling for 16th place in the SEC. Unlike the NFL though, you don't get draft picks early for being terrible, you only get new coaches. Billy's departure from Florida is long overdue, but they have no choice but to keep them until they can confirm that they are not going bowling. He still hasn't gotten the memo about DJ Lagway and continues to play the quarterback hokey pokey between him and Graham Mertz. He ain't a smart fella, but he sure is a fart smeller. Meanwhile, the Cowbell College still has a certain rocket buried deep in their sphincter, so they are trying to rebound with a conference win. Unfortunately, the collapse from last week was far from the last, as the Bulldog defense somehow made Graham Mertz look competent behind the pocket. In fact, both quarterbacks were near perfect. Mertz only missed 2 passes and Lagway was 7 of 7. It's proof that while a team sucks, there's always someone worse. Such is the result of the game in which even the Southland Conference wants nothing with. Yes, Florida won, but they didn't look great doing it. State had over 200 yards running the ball when last week Toledo kept State from running more than 50. The Gator defense is Charmin ultra soft. You get a week to prep before you face off against another state enemy in Central Florida and Gus Malzahn. Either fix the defense or go ahead and put on a blindfold for the rest of the season. Mississippi State, I would tell you the same thing, but the State fans have already simmed to next season. Speaking of simming, someone must have simulated this game because what the hell happened to you? Guess y'all thought you were on a bye week. Now I know the Tar Heels were having their own problems at the quarterback position as Max Johnson went out early in the season, so it was a battle between Connor Harrell and Jacoby Criswell, and contrary to what we thought, Mac Brown gave the job to Criswell. Credit to North Carolina though, they were kind enough to pay James Madison $500,000 to come into Chapel Hill and put a 70-point bomb on him. You don't get that kind of patronage in any other conference. I wonder why. North Carolina was an absolute disaster. James Madison put up 58 points in one half. 58 points! The only thing you have to fall back on was that James Madison was classless for putting up that many points early in the game. Which isn't even true. You just suck that much. Sure, your offense scored 50 points, but what does that do when the defense forfeit before the game? If anything, the 70 points was a mercy. I guess the Dukes missed a few layups. Mac Brown is the polar opposite of Kirk Ferentz. They are both old coaches far past their prime with 2 different sides of the ball which run on autopilot. One thing that Mac Brown has that Kirk doesn't though is the honors of this week's Clown of the Week. Might be time for Mac Brown to do what all the cool coaches are doing now and become an analyst. You can hate me all you want, but until most teams from the ACC don't get irritable bowel syndrome every time they step onto the field, I will continue to call it out for being a tank conference. Prove me wrong. Again? Come on, Mountaineers, can't y'all have good weather for once? Virginia is carrying the ACC. I'll live and die by that statement. Going on the road and scoring a 40-bomber on the teal turf is something that they deserve credit for, considering the previous game we just talked about. They didn't let the Maryland game get to them and managed to get it together. Virginia's rushing game was monstrous in this game, with almost 400 yards on the ground between 9 different players. They had another 100 through the air as well. It was a very impressive win considering the state of the program. Tony Elliott has already reached his projected win total in the first 4 games of the season, so special shout out to him. They'll get a rest week before the huge game against Boston College, which could very well determine a major portion of their season. At least next week, you won't be thrown to ESPN minus like you were this week. Welcome back to Morgantown, where a matchup awaits between two teams already talking about basketball season. These squads desperately need a win in order to meet expectations for the season, so they both know the stakes. It was an extremely competitive game down to the wire, with Jalen Daniels and Garrett Green trading mistakes back and forth up until the weather delay, which switched the game to ESPN2. Suddenly, the viewer base died. Sorta like Kansas, as the Jayhawks fell apart and the Mountaineers capitalized. Green, remembering the results of the Penn State game, activated his clutch bone this time and led the Mountaineers down the field. He then took West Virginia home to the place where they belong.
Taylor in motion. He throws to the outside. Gallagher, touchdown, West Virginia.
Now suppose the Kansas downfall was closer than we thought. Jalen Daniels was someone who I thought was going to be the piece of this offense that would win Kansas these types of games, but he looks like a shell of his former self. Whatever the deal is, it's very unfortunate to see Kansas revert back to the Kansas we're used to seeing. The Mountaineers, on the other hand, bounce back with a much-needed win at home before the schedule really takes a dive for the worst. 3 ranked teams in a row await after the bye. Can Neil Brown keep his job afloat? It's the Big 12, so who knows? Welcome to the 2024 season, Michigan. We've all been wondering what happened to you. Good timing to return too, considering the weight this game has. This is the first Big Ten match for USC, so of course they were going to show up. Well, partly. This is a Lincoln Riley defense that we're talking about, so they'll only play at 50%, not any further. While most offensive game plans focus on skill, ability, and strategy, Michigan said, "F it, run it and see what happens." Luckily for them, it panned out pretty well. 290 yards on the ground is a pretty good stat to have considering Miller Moss for USC was on fire in this game. Khalil Mullings was making mincemeat of yet another defensive front, and Donovan Edwards finally had a decent performance. Michigan was still battling quarterback trouble, so they did the polar opposite of Syracuse and abandoned the pass. Because USC tackled like an elementary schooler against a mascot, the passing game didn't really even need to be opened up. Whether it's because Alex Orji is just that bad, or whether they didn't feel like it at all, it worked out well. The game would come down to a 4th and goal stand. And if you know anything about what I just said about Lincoln Riley, then you'll know exactly what's about to happen.
Mullings. He's in. Touchdown, Michigan.
I guess there just weren't enough Trojans to deal with this orgy, which is hilarious considering Orji had less than 30 yards passing in this game. Still though, this is a huge shift in the trajectory of Michigan's season. A 6-win outcome has suddenly been reversed to the possibility of a playoff berth. Of course, with Oregon and Ohio State down the stretch, it's not going to be easy, but with the offense now existing, anything's possible. For USC, there isn't anything else to say other than, welcome to the Big Ten. Living and dying by one side of the ball won't work in this conference. Well, it might be time to hit the panic button if I'm LSU. Yes, you did win this game, and yes, you did win it by multiple scores, but this game was still competitive to the 4th quarter. To put this into perspective, UCLA got wiped off the face of the earth by Indiana earlier before playing you. LSU is far more talented than the Bruins, but as per the norm under Brian Kelly, lacks the discipline. The defense has improved slightly, sure, but that's like saying the 2018 Cleveland Browns improved from the 2017 season. Anything is better than 0-12. With the ref ball shit show that was last week, I was expecting an LSU team that was a little less penalty driven than last week. I was wrong. LSU couldn't go a drive without getting a flag. Nussmeier had a great day with 350 yards in the air, but the offense has never been the problem for LSU. With tackling built like EA video game physics by the secondary, LSU just can't stop anybody. Their line isn't the problem, as they had 5 sacks in this game and held UCLA to less than 100 yards on the ground. The defensive backfield has a severe problem, and with Burger King at the helm, there's a better chance of Livy Dunn endorsing Squidtard Sports than there is of him fixing this backfield's fundamental problems. If I'm an LSU fan, I'm shivering in my boots thinking of what ungodly things Lane Kiffin will do to this defense. To make matters all the more worse, it seems the injury bug has yet another snack to feed on, and this time, it's a full-course meal. This could be very well the thing that breaks the LSU defense. Prayers for a quick recovery. Louisville has got to be the most forgotten team in college football. They aren't good enough to be nationally relevant, but they are nowhere near bad enough to be a joke in the college football world. They're just kinda there. Nonetheless, this was a big win for the Cardinals. They needed a conference win to give them some respect, and they got it. 50-year-old Tyler Shaw was part of the reason, as he had 269 yards passing. Ja'Cory Brooks and Malik Rutherford were having a battle for the wide receiver MVP, as they each had 100 receiving yards. And while Haynes King had more yards passing, Tech just shot themselves in the foot too many times. The Louisville defense was also living in Tech's backfield the entire game. The mismatch on the line of scrimmage is ultimately what the game came down to. The Jackets are far from out of the count though, as they can still have a successful year, but from this point onward, it does not get any easier. Louisville, on the other hand, is going on the deep end immediately, as they'll be going to South Bend next week, who I'm sure is looking for revenge after last season's escapades. Worse off considering that Northern Illinois pissed them off. Good luck. I don't think I'm ready to cover this one. Both teams struggled with lower quality opponents last week, so I should have seen it coming, but dear lord. If you want to know anything about Auburn, picture Michigan's quarterback situation and then imagine what it would look like if every single quarterback on their team was Jeff Sims. Said situation is the Auburn Tigers. Holy hell. I thought Hugh Freeze was a quarterback whisperer. It sounds like he's screaming for help. This game was the football game rendition of a Star Wars sequel, so bad you had to turn away from it. Hank Brown, who started the game for the Tigers, was benched for Peyton Thorne, who, as you would expect, was no improvement. Taylon Green wasn't any better for the Razorbacks, as he couldn't figure out which color jersey his receivers were wearing. This culminated into a battle of who could open up the run. The answer was in the fact that Taylon Green was a rushing quarterback. The rest is history. The season has officially unraveled for the Barn. Losing at home like this to the Pig Time squad likely means many more losses are coming soon. I don't see Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence waiting behind the benches, so what else can be done other than to prepare for the inevitable? Whether or not you think Hugh Freeze is on the hot seat, the couch that he's sitting on is definitely rising in temperature. I sense a potential tanking coming. You want to know something really crazy? We're 5 weeks into the college football season and Rutgers is undefeated. There are fans of teams already selling their season tickets, but here's Rutgers, the Scarlet Knights, unscathed after 5 weeks of football. Now granted, they've only played 3 games, but still, this is impressive. Virginia Tech already lost to Vanderbilt, so I suppose losing to another Cinderella story isn't the most surprising thing I've seen. Rutgers is surprisingly strong on the line of scrimmage. This is actually the first game in which their O-line is allowed a sack. Kyron Drones was struggling to complete a pass under the pressure of the defense, and while Tech was getting their own pressure in, Ethan Krakatoa had double the passing yards of Drones. Though Tech made a great effort to come back into the game at the end, the Scarlet Knights made a field goal to seal the deal in their favor. Virginia Tech hasn't beaten a non-conference Power 5 team at home since 2009, and unfortunately, that streak will continue. Enter Sandman? Nah, enter a new fucking quarterback. It's time for Arizona State's introduction to the Big 12 conference play. As nice as the uniforms look, I was convinced that Arizona State would continue their villain arc with Cam Scatabo at the helm, being villains as the Devils would be fitting. Unfortunately for them, the Red Raiders have put an end to that. While quarterback play was pretty even between the two squads, the difference would be in the run game. While Cam Skibbity did carry the receiving game, he was actually shut down this time running the ball, and they didn't have a running back number 2 that can make some room. Mix that in with some ref ball interference and Arizona State would be handed their first loss of the season. While this definitely isn't the end-all be-all for the Sun Devils, there are some games in the future which look a little less winnable now. It's also a good time to let you know that Arizona State currently has a 0% winning percentage in conference play all time. Let that one sink in. This is a big one. A statement game between two of the favorites in the Big 12. We were believed to think that Cam Rising would be playing in this one, but by the time the game came along, the decision switched to starting true freshman backup, Isaac Wilson. Which is a shame because if he did play, the combination of both quarterbacks' age would be 49, which surpasses a lot of NFL games. Nonetheless, it would be time to see what Utah is really made of. From the looks of it, I now believe this team is the frontrunner of the Big 12 by a significant margin. What makes Utah so lethal is their ability to completely understand the fundamentals of the game. While they are far from the most talented team in today's world of football, their team is near perfect in how they deliver on each play, especially when on defense, and that showed in this game. Oklahoma State struggled to get anything going offensively. Their offense relied way too much on the legs of Ollie Gordon, and Utah knew that. Both teams had even passing stats, but Utah had 5 times the amount of rushing yards as Oklahoma State. That should tell you the whole story by itself. Micah Bernard was the key in this game, and they took full advantage of it. Now, the offense got very complacent towards the end of the game, which let the folks from Stillwater climb back into it at the end. But a certain fox from a kid's TV show would say, "You're too late." This sets up Utah as a big-time contender in the postseason. If Cam Rising could stay healthy, this team could be a lethal squad for defenses not equipped for the run. Of course, there are still contenders for the Big 12 which could spoil the season for Utah, but from the looks of it, this may not be the last time these two teams play this season. And we finally found it. We were all wondering which SEC team of the Big Six was the fraud of the group. Seems we found our answer. Whether or not you think Mizzou is sluggish following a win over Boston College, no team should be in this position against a team who just lost to Georgia State. If this is how you're planning to convince us that you're a top 10 team, great job. Real convincing there. Brady Cook was in some major trouble in this one, not seeing open receivers, relying too heavily on the arm of Luther Burden, and while Mizzou outgained Vandy in both rushing and passing yards, they couldn't do much with it. Vandy woke up and punched you in the mouth for not taking them seriously. That's all there is to it. Luckily for Mizzou, since the kickers were about as clutch as Kyle Shanahan in Super Bowls, it would go into overtime following a missed kick by Vandy. Both teams immediately exchanged scores in the first overtime, and in the second overtime, it would be a battle of field goals. Which, well... Missouri survives. I couldn't think of a word more fitting than that. You're what Oregon was in week 1 and 2. You may still be a top 10 team, but you're going to have to spend the next few weeks proving it. We'll see how Coach Eli Drinkwitz fixes this issue. The Iron Skillet. Most people didn't even know this game was on because guess where it was? Everyone's favorite CW network. Which was definitely the wrong call because holy hell this game was chaotic. Remember when we discussed the James Madison, North Carolina game? Do you want to see it again? Well, here it is. The first half of the game was a complete and total nightmare for TCU. The Horsies put up 41 points in one half, and to top things off, they sent Sonny Dykes to the Shadow Realm before the end of the half. TCU attempted a comeback in the second half, but with a massive deficit, their efforts were in vain. Suppose this is what happens when you fumble the ball 5 times. Thus, SMU gets the victory over their rival. TCU and Kansas play next week, and I don't think I need to tell you how badly both of those teams need a win. It could always be worse, though. I mean, UTEP had to lose on something called True TV. Okay, I take back my previous comment about the ACC. Miami is the frontrunner of the conference. With the Bulls giving Alabama trouble for 3.5 quarters, it was expected a result close to that would occur in this game. But Miami went into their turf and stomped a mud hole into South Florida. Heisman contender Cam Ward had another elite game with 400 yards passing and 43 more on the ground. While South Florida did their best to contend with 300 yards passing, the Miami defense held strong and took care of business. This Miami team isn't just good, they are complete. Built with what is likely the best roster under Mario Cristobal. I'm expecting the Canes to be in contention for a bye week in the playoffs. We shall see though, because by this point last season, Miami was also undefeated before becoming the victim of the Georgia Tech knee slapper. So time will tell if the Canes can continue their winning streak. Side note, pay attention to that Tulane versus South Florida game next week. That could be influential for the 12th seed. I declare that the winner of this game earns the right to wear purple for the rest of the season, because these two teams share identical color schemes, and that's throwing me off. Anyway, this is Washington's prime introduction to the Big Ten, and unlike their brothers in California, they actually delivered on their introduction, and held Northwestern to just 5 points. Will Roger looked much more comfortable in the pocket with a better passing percentage and no turnovers. Granted, they were playing Northwestern, who moved as much offensively as a brick, but a win is a win, and beating a Big Ten squad is better than losing to a Mountain West one. Washington is in for Friday night warfare against a certain undefeated Scarlet Knight, so we'll be seeing if Rutgers can continue their reign of dominance. I never thought I'd see the day where California would be seen as America's team. You know what else I never thought I'd see? Florida State winning a football game. Of course, both things occurred this week. The game was about as disturbing as advertised, as DJ Oogly Boogly still couldn't figure out which button to hit on the controller, and Mike Norvell still won't disconnect that controller for another quarterback. So we were left with an absolute atrocity of a football game. Mendoza was better in terms of yards, but couldn't score to save his life. In fact, nobody besides the kickers could. The Cal line was like watching a group of cars against a group of tanks. They couldn't block for more than a nanosecond. They squandered enough offensive possessions to the point that eventually Florida State maintained a lead, and once Cal came back into the field, we all sort of had a feeling how it was going to go.
Pressure. Mendoza sacked. Edwin Joseph.
Well, it's about time. Florida State finally did it. Looks like they aren't as dead as previously thought. The only thing that really needs to be said other than this is that Miami and Clemson better do what they're supposed to, otherwise we literally may have to relegate this entire conference to the group of 5. This one had a major story behind it. Josh Heupel, the current coach of Tennessee, was the quarterback that led Oklahoma to a national title in 2000. He also coached for them before getting fired by Bob Stoops. So to say this game was a little personal on the side of the Vols was nothing short of the truth. It was expected that this game would be a high-flying shootout with 40 points being scored by both teams. Instead, what we got was Iowa versus Iowa State 2 Electric Boogaloo. Nico, while not forcing any turnovers, seemed to be uncomfortable in the pocket. Some of this was due to the loss of tackle Lance Hurd, who was out for the game. But Oklahoma's defensive line was making him eat it all night long, with multiple forced fumbles and sacks. Despite that though, Nico's shortcomings were nothing compared to that of what Oklahoma went through. Jackson Arnold's offense is what happens when you take what little semblance of an offense that you have and piss all over it. It was so bad that before the end of the first half, he was benched for a true freshman at home. The most baffling part of this is that true freshman, that being Michael Hawkins Jr., came out and played leagues better than Arnold did. Still, the Volunteer defense was just too much for him to deal with, and the Vols forced 3 sacks and 11 tackles for losses the whole night. It was a total mismatch. Tennessee gave Oklahoma all the opportunities in the world to come back, as they couldn't gain any yards either, but they did just an inch better than Oklahoma when it came to scoring, and that's what it came down to. The Vols are now a top 5 team and are with the other juggernauts of the SEC in terms of competition for the conference. Believe the hype. Oh. As for Oklahoma, their run for said competition is likely done. But if I'm Auburn, I'm putting a few brownies in my pants seeing what this revitalized OU offense could do to me. Wait a minute, what? Iowa has an offense now? The Hawkeyes having a great running game and a competent quarterback? When did this happen? And how? The answer, though, has always been there.
Minnesota!
To think I propped this team up after losing by a game-winning field goal to North Carolina. As it turns out, North Carolina is mega ass, and you are too. This is a complete PJ Fleck masterclass right here. Another year of just plain mid. No adjustments in sight. Iowa keeps running the ball down your throat, but no! Let's wait until Cade McNamara tries to hit us with the deep ball. Do you not know who you are playing? At least make an attempt to stop them! With this game over with now, Iowa gets to prepare for the disembowelment at the hands of Ohio State after their bye week. And as for Minnesota, you get to go through this again because your next opponent is Michigan, who primarily runs the ball. So we'll see if PJ Fleck can make some adjustments before the inevitable 7-5 or 6-6 season. Despite neither of these teams being ranked, this was a matchup I was really looking forward to between two even teams with different play styles. Michigan State likes to air out the ball, while Boston College likes to run the ball down your throat. Although the Spartans were at a major disadvantage with their best receivers being out. So we didn't get as much offense as expected, but we were in for a good game. From one quarterback. Thomas Castellanos was okay in this game, nothing explosive or flashy, but he did get the job done where it needed to be. Aiden Childs, on the other hand, proved how reliant he was on Nick Marsh and Jerron Glover, as he had 3 picks in this game. Bro was a turnover machine. He was doing what teams like Utah and Tennessee were trying to avoid in their games, blowing the game. Which, well, that's pretty much what happened. Once Boston College took the lead at the end of the game, Childs added one last cherry to the sundae.
Eagles have rushed 4. They'll bring 4 again this time. Childs eludes the first rush, going to hang it up downfield for Foster in the end zone. It's intercepted!
Well, while Michigan State did lose, putting up a fight on the road against a team like this is still far much better than anything from last year's team. I'm sure you'll do better against the teams next on your schedule. Now that I think about it, 3-3 and a bad record midway through the season. Did anyone see the truck on Colorado's field last week? It's got nothing to do with this game, I just thought that was sort of funny. Anyway, with the smack that Shedeur and co. talked through the week, they've made themselves into massive villains this year. However, they've also become media sensations. This took a lot of the attention in the primetime games, as Dave Aranda at this point was coaching for his job because too many more losses like the ones he's been taking, and it won't be long until he's sent to the coaching carousel. Deion Sanders has gone after this year despite whatever result is on the field because he'll be attempting to join Shedeur wherever he goes, and probably that'll be the NFL. One thing I'll definitely give Colorado credit for is that all of their games are entertaining to watch. Sawyer Robinson, being as much of a dual threat as he was, made Colorado have to work around them, and it didn't really pan out well for him. It became a shootout between Shedeur and Robertson, and despite a great effort from the former, Baylor's tricky play style just became too much for the Buffs, and all that's left now is a Hail Mary by Shedeur, and it's a wrap.
From one side. The Big 12 opener comes down to this play. Sanders gets the feet set toward the end zone for the game.
You have got to be kidding me. How did you let that happen? Getting beat by a 1v1 on a Hail Mary? I don't care if it's called the Victory Cigar. How do you let that happen to you? Well, there is absolutely no way that the football gods are letting that one happen and then backing out of the results. So, good night, Baylor.
OT on 1st and goal. It's Richardson. Ball is out, recovered. You blew it! And knocked out of the end zone.
Like I said earlier, despite their smack talking, I'll say that Colorado is worthy of the views that they get. Colorado might actually make it to bowl eligibility this year. Wouldn't that be something? For Baylor and Dave Aranda, yeah, he's bad, but it's hard to embarrass yourself any further than that. What the fuck? Oh, you absolute morons! You did the Twitter curse! Did Florida State teach you nothing? Yes, I know it was a BYU whiteout at midnight. I know BYU was undefeated, but Kansas State just jumped out of a window. Avery Johnson with no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, Dylan Edwards less than 50 total yards, and the only guy who showed up in the game was DJ Giddens, and even he had less than 100 yards total. BYU did the bare minimum on offense, as Jake Retzlaff had less than 150 yards passing. Kansas State just kept laying out Cleveland Steamers every time they stepped out to play offense. You were the wild card of the Big 12. The team that could potentially outbid Utah or Oklahoma State for the title. But you came out and made it look like Kansas could beat you. You're, by definition, a complete and total fraud. Enjoy the trolling, and like that Twitter fan, you can expect 5 layers of it up your sphincter. Well, that's everything that Week 4 had to offer. I'm sure Week 5 will get even more insane because in college football, the chaos only grows stronger as the weeks progress. As always, thank you to all my patrons, which really is not a lot of them right now, but hopefully that grows. If you're interested in seeing this series sooner, I would highly suggest checking that out and maybe subscribing if you want. It'd be really helpful. Anyway, see you all in the next video, and as always, power to Tardaria! Tell me General Booty had less interceptions than Arch Manning this week? I guess we know who the real #1 recruit is.